Senator Chris Murphy asked a simple question. What is white identity, and how is it being erased? This should have been easy. The man being asked wrote a 300-page book about it. The entire thesis of his book is that white identity is under attack in America. He spent years writing about this, years giving speeches, years building a career on this exact argument. And when a senator asked him to explain it, he couldn't. Let me think about this. That's Jeremy Carl, Donald Trump's nominee for Assistant Secretary of State, the man who would represent America at the United Nations. And when asked to define the central concept of his entire worldview, he stammered and fumbled and couldn't give a coherent answer. Then he cited Bad Bunny's Spanish-language Super Bowl halftime show as evidence that white culture is being erased. Yesterday, a Republican senator announced he's voting against Carl. The nomination is likely dead. And Trump's response? He's standing by him. Called him highly qualified. This is what passes for acceptable now. And it's all on video. If you're new here, I'm Jordan Vale, and we're building a community of people who refuse to stand by while democracy is under attack. We need voices like yours in this fight, so hit that subscribe button. Let me show you exactly what happened Thursday at Jeremy Carl's Senate confirmation hearing. Because this isn't just embarrassing. This reveals everything about who Trump nominates and why. Jeremy Carl is Trump's nominee for Assistant Secretary of State for International Organizations. If confirmed, he would oversee over 100 diplomats representing the United States at the United Nations, UNICEF, the UN Food and Agriculture Organization. He would be America's voice on the world stage. 2 days ago, Thursday, he testified before the Senate Foreign Relations Committee. Senator Chris Murphy, a Democrat from Connecticut, asked him, "Tell me how you define white identity and what you think is being erased about white identity." Carl wrote a book about this, published in 2024. It's called The Unprotected Class: How Anti-White Racism is Tearing America Apart. 300 pages arguing that white Americans are the real victims of discrimination, that white identity is under attack, that this is destroying the country. So when Murphy asked him to define white identity and explain what's being erased, Carl should have had an answer ready. Instead, he said, certain types of Anglo-derived culture that comes from our history. Murphy pressed, like what? And Carl fell apart.
Tell me how you define white identity and what you think is being erased about white identity.
Certain types of Anglo-derived culture that comes from our history.
Like what?
Let me think about this. Senator, I would say if you were to look at the book by one of your former Senate colleagues, Born Fighting, about the sort of Scots-Irish military culture and certain, pride that went with that, that would be one example. Obviously, you could have sub-elements of that culture. You could have Italians, you could have Irish, and those are in many ways more
but you're worried about white culture. You're not worried about, you're now retreating to ethnic identity. You don't speak about ethnic identity. You speak about white identity. So tell me the values that stitch together white identity and that make it different than black identity.
I would say that the white church is very different than the black church in terms of its tone and style on average. Foodways could often be different.
He couldn't explain his own thesis. He referenced someone else's book. He talked about Scotch-Irish military culture. He stammered through vague generalities. And then he pivoted to music.
And those are being erased. And those are being erased.
Music could be different. Well, if you look at the Super Bowl halftime show, which was not in English this year.
There it is, the Bad Bunny moment. Last week, Bad Bunny performed the Super Bowl halftime show, the first primarily Spanish-language halftime show in Super Bowl history. 128 million people watched. It celebrated Puerto Rican and Latino culture. It ended with God Bless America, followed by naming every country in the Americas. The message on the stadium screen said, "The only thing more powerful than hate is love." Jeremy Carl sees that as evidence of white culture being erased. Senator Murphy pressed him. So our ability to access white churches or white food or white music is being erased? Carl responded, I am concerned with majority common American culture that we had for some time, that particularly through mass immigration, I think has become much more balkanized, and I think that weakens us. And Murphy nailed him. Let's watch.
So our ability to access white churches or white food or white music is being erased?
I am concerned with the majority common American culture that we had for some time that through particularly mass immigration, I think has become much more balkanized, and I think that weakens us. And again, I'm not running away from that comment. I'm not apologizing for
Well,
it.
I'm way over my time. I think you're struggling to answer this question, right? Because underlying your beliefs is a sentiment that white culture is just simply better.
Carl couldn't respond because Murphy was right. Carl's entire worldview is that a Puerto Rican performing in Spanish at the Super Bowl is an attack on white people, that Latino representation equals white erasure, that anything not centering white culture is threatening American identity. That's white nationalism. And Carl couldn't defend it when asked directly. But Murphy wasn't done. He asked Carl, "Your belief is that white Americans face more discrimination than black Americans?" Carl didn't hesitate. "On average, Senator, yes, that's correct, and I'm not running away from that. White Americans face more discrimination than black Americans. That's what Trump's State Department nominee believes. A man who would represent America at the United Nations thinks white people are the most oppressed group in this country." Murphy's response was devastating. "I appreciate you being very honest that you believe that white Americans are subject to greater amounts of discrimination in this country than black Americans. I do not think that's a sentiment that is shared broadly on this committee. It is all what makes you just wildly, wildly unqualified to take this post." Then Senator Cory Booker asked Carl about the Holocaust. Carl admitted, "One of my weaknesses is sometimes I take an idea too far. I made some comments about minimizing the effects of the Holocaust that were absolutely wrong, and I'm not going to sit here and defend them." He minimized the Holocaust, he admitted it, and he's still Trump's nominee. Senator Jeanne Shaheen quoted Carl from an October 2024 podcast appearance. Carl had said, "Jews have loved to play the victim. The Holocaust dominates so much of modern Jewish history. Jews love to see themselves as oppressed." Shaheen noted that Carl has a pattern of anti-Semitic comments. Let me tell you what else Jeremy Carl has said and written, because the hearing only scratched the surface. And what makes this even worse is that Carl tried to hide most of it. Before his nomination was announced, Carl deleted over 5,000 social media posts. 5,000. He went through his Twitter account systematically and erased years of content. He knew what he'd written was disqualifying. He knew it would cause problems. So he tried to make it disappear. But CNN's K-file found them anyway. They used the Wayback Machine, an internet archive that captures websites as they existed in the past. And what they found reveals who Jeremy Carl really is. His book argues that white Americans are increasingly second-class citizens in a country their ancestors founded. He accuses the Democratic Party of waging an all-out assault on the rights of white people. That's published material he can't delete. That's his public face. The deleted posts show what he says when he thinks no one's keeping a permanent record. Here's what he tried to erase. On peaceful coexistence with Democrats. There is no peaceful coexistence we are going to have when our opposition is led by people like this. We either win or die. He called the Democratic Party the treason party and evil. He called for the execution of the head of the American Federation of Teachers. Execution. He wrote that Randy Weingarten should be tried and given the death penalty for a teachers' union leader. On George Floyd's death, he wrote, "I didn't think I could care less about a death than I did about violent, drug-addicted felon George Floyd, but gangster Dante Wright may change my mind." He also said Floyd was looking up from hell. On Juneteenth, race hustling and white shaming holiday. If you're a white person celebrating Juneteenth, you've already surrendered. He's written extensively about the Great Replacement Theory. That's the conspiracy that mass immigration is a deliberate policy to replace white populations. He told Tucker Carlson in April 2024, "We are essentially moving to what is effectively a post-white America." This is who Donald Trump nominated to represent the United States at the United Nations. And yesterday, a Republican senator said no. Senator John Curtis from Utah announced his opposition. Not a moderate from a swing state, not someone from New England who might be expected to break with Trump, a Republican from Utah, one of the most conservative states in the country, a state Trump won easily. Here's Curtis's statement. After reviewing his record and participating in today's hearing, I do not believe that Jeremy Carl is the right person to represent our nation's best interests in international forums, and I find his anti-Israel views and insensitive remarks about the Jewish people unbecoming of the position for which he has been nominated. Read that again. A conservative Republican from Utah had to be the one to say this nominee is unacceptable. Not Trump, not the White House, not Republican leadership. A single senator from a deep red state looked at Carl's record and said, I can't support this. Curtis's opposition matters because Republicans only have a one-vote advantage on the Foreign Relations Committee. If Curtis joins all Democrats voting no, Carl doesn't have the votes to advance out of committee. The nomination can't reach the full Senate floor. It's dead. A Republican from Utah had to be the one to say, this is too far. And even that only happened after a disastrous hearing where Carl couldn't explain his own beliefs, admitted to Holocaust minimization, and claimed white people are the most discriminated against group in America. And Trump's response? Yesterday, the White House released a statement. They're standing by Carl. They praised his work in Trump's first administration. They called him highly qualified. Think about that. Even after Carl couldn't explain his own beliefs at a Senate hearing, even after he admitted to Holocaust minimization, even after claiming white people face more discrimination than black people, even after citing Bad Bunny performing in Spanish as proof of white erasure, even after a Republican senator announced opposition, Trump says Carl is highly qualified. In 1987, Douglas Ginsburg was nominated to the Supreme Court. He was a federal judge, Harvard Law School graduate, respected legal scholar. Then it came out that he had smoked marijuana in the past. Not as a judge, not recently, in the 1960s and 70s, when he was a law student and young professor. The reaction was immediate. He withdrew his nomination. Marijuana use was disqualifying. In 2026, Jeremy Carl testifies before the Senate. He can't explain his own book's central thesis. He cites a Puerto Rican artist performing in Spanish as evidence of white erasure. He admits to Holocaust minimization. He claims white Americans are more discriminated against than black Americans. He deleted 5,000 posts calling for executions and imprisonments. A Republican senator announces opposition, and Donald Trump calls him highly qualified. That's not progress. That's a collapse in standards. That's going from marijuana use in college is disqualifying to white nationalism and Holocaust minimization are fine. Jeremy Carl's worldview is simple. Anything that doesn't center white people is an attack on white people. A Spanish-language Super Bowl halftime show watched by 128 million people? White erasure. Not a celebration of Puerto Rican culture. Not an artist performing in his native language for the biggest audience of his career. Not America showcasing its diversity on the world's biggest stage. No. To Carl, it's evidence that white culture is under attack. Immigration from Latin America, Asia, Africa, white replacement. Not people seeking better lives. Not America continuing its history as a nation of immigrants. Not economic opportunity or family reunification. To Carl, it's a deliberate conspiracy to eliminate white Americans. Celebrating Juneteenth, the day slavery ended, race hustling and white shaming. Not commemorating one of the most important moments in American history. Not acknowledging the end of one of our greatest moral failures. To Carl, if you're white and you celebrate it, you've surrendered. And when asked to explain this worldview, when given the opportunity to defend his beliefs to the United States Senate, he couldn't. He stammered. He fumbled. He referenced someone else's book. He brought up Bad Bunny. Because white nationalism doesn't hold up under scrutiny. It doesn't make sense when you have to explain it out loud. It falls apart when someone asks you direct questions. Senator Murphy saw it. He said Carl was struggling because underlying your beliefs is a sentiment that white culture is simply better. Carl couldn't argue, because Murphy was right, and everyone watching knew it. But Trump doesn't care. The White House doesn't care. They're standing by him, even with a Republican senator opposing, even with the nomination likely dead. They're calling him highly qualified. That's the message. White nationalism isn't disqualifying. Holocaust minimization isn't disqualifying. Claiming white people are the most oppressed group in America isn't disqualifying. In 2026, under Donald Trump, those things are credentials. Jeremy Carl will probably not be confirmed. John Curtis's opposition likely killed the nomination, but Trump won't pull it. He won't withdraw it. He'll let it die in committee while calling Carl highly qualified the entire time. Because withdrawing would suggest Carl's views are unacceptable, and Trump doesn't believe that. The White House doesn't believe that. They believe a man who sees Bad Bunny performing in Spanish as white erasure is qualified to represent America at the United Nations. They believe a man who can't explain his own book's thesis should oversee 100 diplomats. They believe a man who minimized the Holocaust and claims white Americans face more discrimination than black Americans deserves to speak for the United States on the world stage. That's where we are. That's the standard. And it's all on video. Jeremy Carl fumbling through basic questions, citing the Super Bowl, admitting to Holocaust minimization. Trump calling him highly qualified anyway. What do you think? Is I can't explain my own beliefs, but Bad Bunny proves white erasure an acceptable qualification for representing America? Should Trump withdraw the nomination now that a Republican opposes it? And what does it say about our standards that marijuana use was disqualifying in 1987, but white nationalism isn't in 2026? Share this video. People need to know that Trump's State Department nominee couldn't define white identity when asked, then cited Bad Bunny's Spanish-language Super Bowl performance as evidence it's being erased. They need to understand he admitted to Holocaust minimization and claims white Americans face more discrimination than black Americans. They need to see that a Republican senator had to be the one to say, "This is too far." And they need to hear Trump calling him highly qualified anyway. We're building something here. A community that recognizes when someone can't explain their own beliefs, those beliefs probably don't hold up. That understands citing a Puerto Rican performing in Spanish as white erasure reveals exactly what you think about who belongs in America. That sees the collapse in standards from marijuana use to white nationalism. Because this isn't about one bad nominee. This is about what Trump considers acceptable. And apparently, white nationalism is. Thanks for spending a few minutes digging into this with me. If you want more grounded, progressive commentary without the outrage bait, subscribe and stick around. Every time you watch, share, and engage, it helps build a community that believes democracy is worth understanding and defending. I'll see you in the next video.